Welcome to TradeSense, where Windward brings together the brightest minds in global trade, maritime, and AI to break down the biggest developments shaping our industry. I'm Michelle Wiese Bockmann, Senior Maritime Intelligence Analyst at Windward, and in each short episode, we go beyond the buzzwords to deliver insights that matter. Today I'm speaking with Professor George Theocharidis, Professor of Maritime Law and Policy from the World Maritime University in Sweden. Professor Theocharidis is one of the authors of a landmark report commissioned by the International Maritime Organization back in 2022 into unlawful practices associated with fraudulent flag registration and registries. Hi, Professor Theocharidis. Thank you for joining us, and how are you going?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind invitation, and I'm very glad to be here.
So let's get started, and perhaps let's get into it by explaining what exactly is a false flag. How is it defined? Because there's a lot of confusion about exactly what this is constituted.
All right, on that, the primary reason seems to be that at the moment, we do not have a proper legal instrument which will provide definitions. So most of the definitions that we have, they are non-scientific, and they rather describe the problem. At the moment, I will also adopt, let's say, the one that IHS Markit, S&P Global, which is the entity authorized by the IMO to verify data of various vessels from maritime administrations. So according to that, false flag, of course, has to be linked to a ship. So we'd rather use the term false flag ship, is one that transmits, broadcasts, displays, or otherwise engages in the misuse of flag details, which then are confirmed by the flag administration as not being legally registered, and therefore that particular vessel then in the platform of Wiese is recorded as false flag vessel. And I think that that definition provides the criteria, the essential requirements to have a false flag ship. Of course, one can elaborate on that. We have various other elements which exist, but I think at the moment we may adopt that.
So a false flagged ship can be using a fraudulent registry for a flag that doesn't really belong. And it can also be saying, for example, it's flying the flag of Panama, but not be legally recognized by that administration as flying the flag. So there's kind of like two different ways of being false flagged in a way.
Well, we probably need to take that a little bit from the start. Fraudulent registration, we do have a definition of that. IMO since 2020, when we had a intersessional correspondence group, we came up with this definition, which has been adopted in a resolution. Fraudulent registration of a ship means really the intentional misrepresentation of information and documentation by which a ship is purportedly given its nationality without authorization by the government of the misrepresented flag state at the relevant time. So, as you correctly stated, it may very well be that we have a vessel which has not been registered at all in a particular registry, an existing registry, and that is a typical case of a false flag ship, and we have also fraudulent registration. We may also have a case where we have a vessel which has documents from a registry which does not exist at all. So it's not the case, the previous example we said Panama, Liberia, which does not have any registry at all. The typical case is, you probably have heard about that, the Matthew Island, which is a rock in the middle of the ocean. It doesn't have a proper flag, it doesn't have a proper registry, yet there have been attempts to register vessels. These are what we would call migrant false flag ships. It's another species. We have all kinds of species. Unfortunately, these perpetrators, they use the loopholes.
What sort of loopholes are being used in order to falsely flag ships?
My introductory statement on that would be that the existing legal framework that we have, unfortunately, cannot deal with a problem. We are actually going around the problem. We are trying to use means which are not fit for purpose. And this is why the problem still exists. Those perpetrators are well aware that many registries do not have the capacity really to find out, to discover that there are fraudulently registered ships. In other words, they're not properly registered in the registry. We have seen since 2018 countries, like, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which at the IMO they submitted documents that they discovered vessels which had not been registered at all in the registry, yet they had documents and they were going around the world. Therefore, those perpetrators, they're trying to find, as we could say, the weak link. Those maybe also ill-equipped registries, and they issue those documents. And because there's no central database, they're very well equipped. I mean, these perpetrators, they know very well how to forge the documents. And it's very hard really for a port state control officer to discover that. And also, we had some other cases, as I said, where countries do not even have an international registry. And it's very hard for a port state control officer. Let's say, for example, if that vessel calls in Georgia, Batumi, it's not very easy for a local port state control officer, and the pressure that they have to do the actual work on the vessel, to inspect the vessel itself and spend time in verifying the validity of those documents. And therefore, in the absence of that, it's very easy for them to have those vessels and actually use them. The other case is, of course, those perpetrators being aware of that. When they call at ports which they have much more, let's say, elaborate systems to examine those documents, they never call at these ports. So that's why we have areas where we have vessels which they stay there all the time, like, for example, tankers which are used as storage places, and they never call at ports, at the national waters of a particular country, territorial waters. And they have documents. And then we have all kinds of issues when, if they're in international waters, it's very hard really to ask for those documents. So it's really that, as I said, the current framework, especially the Constitution of the Oceans, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, it has not been designed really to tackle those problems. And IMO is trying, slowly, of course, because it's a consensus-driven organization, to tackle the problem, convince the member states to agree maybe on some guidelines in the start. I don't see an international convention coming, hard law, as we say, coming very soon, so that, we will start tackling the problem. And one last comment, the basis on which these perpetrators are really making their case is the freedom of navigation. So they're saying they should not be impeded unless there are rules to the opposite. And at the moment, for these phenomena of fraudulent registration, the shadow fleet, so on and so forth, at the moment, framework, we don't have the proper legal tools to tackle the problem.
So here at Windward, we've been doing a lot of work on false flags, and I'm just going to try and list the ones I can remember. Aruba, Curacao, Eswatini, Benin, Malawi, St. Martin. I mean, the list goes on. There are literally hundreds of these false flag ships that are using fraudulent registries as designated by the IMO. Why do we need to care? Because these ships are essentially stateless, lawless. What's at stake here? Allowing these ships to continue to ply the waters around the world.
You're absolutely right. The list is much longer. Very recently, a few days ago, IMO released a catalog of the countries. For example, Guyana false flag, we see that there are about 77. So the issue is that these documents, which are carried by those vessels, in order to be able to take measures, proper measures, they have to call a port. We cannot just, spot, although we have the means to find the vessels, apart from spoofing, the AIS, which is touched, so on and so forth. Those problems you've been meticulously also working on that. I know, Ms. Bockmann, that you've been working on those problems. Even if we identify a particular vessel being in a particular place, we do not have the jurisdiction to intervene unless the vessel calls a port. And then even in that case, I've talked to port state control officers, and they have told me openly, even if we have, let's say, a strong suspicion that a vessel is carrying forged documents, we will probably release it. The reason being is that if we detain it and it will stay there for God knows how long, that will be a potential threat for the environment. So, as I said, despite the fact that you are right, it seems to be, according to the United Nations Convention of the League, call them stateless. But again, we have all kinds of issues. Just to give you an example, the matter, it's quite thorny. There are moot points which at some point they have to be tackled. You have a vessel which, let's say, is registered properly in Panama. And then, because of sanctions, Panama unilaterally deletes the vessel. For a period of time, the vessel will, in the best case, appear as a known flag. If you go to Wiese, there's about 1,000 vessels, 1,000 vessels.
Wiese being the IMO's data tracking system, just for our listeners.
Yeah, 1,000 vessels which are under the unknown status, which means that for a certain period, the vessel, despite the fact that it has been deleted, we cannot do anything about it. We will have to wait for the vessel to register properly somewhere. If after a certain period, according to Wiese, 14 days, the vessel appears to transmit still information from the previous flag, then they will put it under the false flag mark. But then again, legally, it's not easy to treat the vessel as stateless. Let me tell you why. Seafarers, if the vessel is stateless, they don't have valid contracts. Now, these people will need protection. If they want to get their salary, if they want repatriation, who are you going to call? Which will be the entity really to ask for assistance if the vessel is stateless? So, as I said, we have all kinds of issues. Validity of insurance also, marine insurance. Those vessels, most of them engage, as you very well know, in the oil carriage. We also have the matter of validity of bills of lading. Some of them have been forged. Some of them, even if they're valid, if the vessel is considered as stateless, there may be a flaw, which will also, that pervades the whole area of the legal validity of documents. So that's why I said we do not have at the moment the legal tools to tackle the problem. Instead, we try sometimes with national, domestic, as we say, tools, which in some cases they appear not to have the force required in order to tackle properly the problem.
So why do you think this problem is becoming so critical now? I mean, I was tracking a tanker this morning, flagged in Aruba, sailing through the English Channel, laden with a cargo of diesel from Russia. I mean, when you think about it, it's quite outrageous.
Can I just, for a moment, mention something which I think is also important for our dialogue here and for those who will watch us? The false flag ship, I think we approached it. The other notion, I mentioned it briefly, it's what we call the unknown status ship. The third one, and we need to be careful, legally at least, we need to discern that. We have what we call the shadow or dark fleet ship. It does not mean, this is a trichotomy, therefore. Dark shadow fleet vessel does not necessarily mean that it is a false flag ship. It may very well be that it has valid registration and it engages in sanctioned trade, whether that is unilateral, like US sanctions or EU sanctions, or it may be even UN sanctions. But it's a different type. The example which you're mentioning, I don't have the details. It may very well be that it has an Aruba false flag. Therefore, it actually qualifies to be a false flag ship and at the same time part of the shadow fleet. Normally, you would expect that we could intervene and stop that vessel. But as I said, in international waters, it's limited what we can do. And that is an issue, which is, as I said earlier, the counter right or the basic right is the freedom of navigation. So the vessel may argue, yeah, but you're impeding, the freedom of navigation unless there's strong evidence that you have strong evidence. Needless also to mention the incident that we had a few months ago, where a vessel left St. Petersburg and then at some point Estonia embarked on the ship. There was some tension. It was purportedly flying the flag of Gabon. Yet we saw a Russian plane coming. And I understand, we don't know the details, but I understand there must have been some communication. And the master of the vessel must have said, leave us alone. You see there's a plane. You don't want to escalate. NATO also sent a plane, and that was it. The vessel was just escorted and it left. Now, makes you wonder. You have a vessel which flies the Gabon flag and has whatever interest, which we don't know, whether the flag was also false. It may very well be. I also have the suspicion. And then you have some interests which coincide with Russian, because you have a Russian plane coming out from there. So, we have a system. They call it Byzantine. I don't like the term because it's something else, but it's very complicated. We accept it. In other words, the brass plate companies, the fact that you don't need to declare the shareholders, the real interests, where the directors also are. The directors might be in another place and the company might have been incorporated in another place. We have a vessel owned by that company. The central nerve, which sends, the instructions for the vessel, we don't even know where it is. And then you have the transactions for trading, the freight, and we accept it. This is how shipping is run. And as I said, it is a problem which vexes us for a long time now. It's actually before 2015 when we had the first instance of a false flag ship, at least reported to the IMO. Its origins, I couldn't myself actually say how long we have it, but it was definitely below the radar for a long time. It is a problem, but it's only a small part of shipping. However, I do not want to underestimate the significance of that, and I don't want to be a harbinger of bad news, but if one of these vessels, with the particular problems that we described, one way or another in this trichotomy, causes a major casualty, a big oil pollution outside a country, and then all this goes to territorial waters, let's say EU or EUS, then I'm sure you can agree with me that everything will just go fast track, because it will be all over the news. Everybody, the politicians especially, will say, you knew the problem. What were you doing all this time? Why is it the case that you didn't take the measures? So that might trigger, as it happened actually with September 11. And fast track, we had the ISPS, the code.
Yeah, the International Safety and Security Port Codes for our listeners, yeah.
Exactly. So, as I said, I don't want to be a harbinger of negative news, but that might trigger, the mechanism and the international community, IMO, to take this matter faster. It's serious. I mean, IMO is taking it seriously. I'm not saying that it's not taking it seriously, it's taking it very seriously, but it's with a long pace. Don't forget, at the IMO, the Russian Federation is a member. So we have all kinds of talks there. It's part also of the geopolitical situation. Everybody's watching. We know what is happening. I'm not saying that if the war in Ukraine will stop, we will not have the problem. We will still have it. But at the moment, it seems that it's in a way so much connected that, we cannot disentangle it.
For sure, for sure. Do you think geopolitics is slowing down a solution at the IMO? I mean, and as someone who sat in on the legal committee back in March, I mean, there was certainly a lot of tension over this subject.
It's absolutely true. The World Maritime University has been established by the IMO, so I need to be very careful of that. Indeed, there is a strong political flavor behind that. But as I said, it's moving slowly. Yes, you're right. To a certain extent, it has a political flavor.
Well, I certainly hope that there's not an accident needed to resolve the issue of false flags. It's as we agree, a huge issue which the industry is struggling to get a grips with. Professor Theocharidis, thank you very much for joining us for this episode of TradeSense. Really insightful views, and thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
If you found this episode informative and useful, please share this video and follow Windward for more insights, and stay tuned. We've got another expert conversation coming up soon.